The London sun was unseasonably warm for a spring afternoon, casting long shadows from the historic walls of the Tower of London. Tourists packed the pavements 3 or 4 deep, a moving tapestry of languages, selfie sticks, and brightly colored backpacks. Their focus, as always, was the immaculate, stoic figure of the Queen's Guard. The soldier stood perfectly still in his famous bearskin cap and scarlet tunic, his polished boots reflecting the sunlight, a Lee Enfield rifle held vertically by his side. He was a living symbol of centuries of British tradition, a human monument that drew crowds the world over. Among the throng that day was an American tourist named Mark, visiting from Chicago with his wife Sarah and their 2 young children. Mark was a confident man, the kind who made friends easily but also had a tendency to dominate a room. With him was his pride and joy, a stocky, powerful English bulldog named Brutus. Brutus was a classic example of the breed: wrinkled face, pushed-in nose, undershot jaw, and a broad, muscular chest. He was a gentle giant with the family, a lazy lump who loved belly rubs and snored loudly on the sofa. However, to strangers, his appearance could be intimidating. He had a low, rumbling bark that sounded far more ferocious than his actual temperament. The family had stopped at a prime spot along the barrier, just a few feet from the silent sentry. Mark was trying to get the perfect photo. He had already taken several of Sarah and the kids, smiling in front of the guard. "Come on, Dad, let's go see the Ravens," his son, Leo, pleaded, tugging at his father's shirt. Yeah, I'm hungry," his daughter Maya added. But Mark was focused. He had a vision for the ultimate souvenir photo. "Just one more," he said, waving them off. He wanted a shot of Brutus standing proudly in front of the guard. He positioned the bulldog, who was already panting in the heat and looking for a patch of shade. "Sit, Brutus. Sit, boy," Mark commanded. Brutus, more interested in the scent of a hot dog from a nearby vendor, plopped his heavy backside onto the warm pavement, his tongue lolling out. Mark snapped a picture. It was good, but not perfect. He wanted the guard in sharp focus behind the dog. Unbeknownst to Mark, the sentry, a young soldier from the prestigious Coldstream Guards, was already aware of them. He could see the man fussing with the dog in his peripheral vision. His training, honed over months of drills, told him to remain still, to focus on a point in the distance, but a small part of his mind registered the animal. He loved dogs himself. His family back in Manchester had a Labrador. He saw no threat, just a tourist with a family pet. But Mark wasn't finished. He wanted the guard to look at the camera. "Hey, buddy," he called out, his American accent cutting through the ambient noise. "Hey, soldier, can you just look over here for a second?" The guard remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the medieval fortress walls. This was the protocol. They were not to interact with the public. Their discipline was their armor against the constant barrage of distraction. A few onlookers chuckled. Tourists tried to get a reaction from the guards all the time. It was a national sport. They waved, they told jokes, they posed in silly ways, and the guards never flinched. It was a point of pride. Mark, however, felt a prickle of frustration. He wasn't used to being ignored. "Oh, come on, man," he said, a little louder this time. "Just a quick look, for the dog." Brutus, sensing his owner's agitation, let out a low woof. The sound was deep and resonated in his broad chest. A few people nearby stepped back instinctively. The guard, trained to assess threats, registered the bark. His mind categorized it: animal, domestic. No immediate danger. He remained still, but his senses sharpened, a subtle shift only another trained soldier might notice. Sarah, sensing her husband's stubborn streak kicking in, tugged on his arm. "Mark, leave him alone. You got the picture. Let's go." Mark shrugged her off, a little more forcefully than he intended. I just want one decent shot," he muttered. He had an idea. Maybe if Brutus was a little closer to the guard, the perspective would be better. He looked at the barrier. It wasn't that high. He could easily lift the dog over it. The thought was impulsive, the kind of bad idea that pops into your head and should be immediately dismissed. But Mark was caught up in the moment. He was the center of a small, amused audience. He saw himself as a charmingly persistent tourist, not a man about to break several unwritten rules and one or two actual laws. He bent down, hooked his hands under Brutus's stout body, and with a grunt of effort lifted the 50-pound Bulldog. Before Sarah could even process what was happening, before the nearby tourists could gasp, Mark had hoisted Brutus over the metal barrier and set him down on the restricted side. And for a split second, time seemed to freeze. The guard's eyes, which had been trained on the horizon, snapped down to the wrinkled face of the Bulldog now standing just a few feet away. Brutus, confused and a little startled by the sudden change of scenery, looked up at the tall, red-clad figure looming over him. His owner was on the other side of the fence. This new person was standing right there. The crowd fell silent, hundreds of mobile phones suddenly raised, capturing the scene. It was the ultimate London photo op, but for all the wrong reasons. This was no longer a tourist trying to be funny. This was a direct breach of the sacred, unspoken pact between the public and the King's Guard. The soldiers' training instantly overrode everything. The lazy family pet was gone, replaced in his perception by a variable in a security equation, and an unknown animal had breached the perimeter. His mind flew through the protocol. Stamp, shout, port arms. His knuckles tightened, white against the polished wood of his rifle. The next few seconds would determine whether this became a funny story or an international incident. The silence that followed Mark setting Brutus down was thick enough to be cut with a knife. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but to those watching it felt like an eternity. Then chaos erupted, but it was a very specific, disciplined kind of chaos. The guard did not move his feet. He did not turn to face the dog. Instead, his entire body seemed to tense, coiling like a spring. His right boot slammed down onto the pavement with a crack so sharp it echoed off the stone walls. Stamp. Brutus, who had been looking around for his owner, flinched at the sudden, loud noise. His ears, what little there was of them, pricked up. He looked back at the guard, his brow furrowing in that characteristic bulldog way, a look of confused concern. The guard's voice, when it came, was not a shout of panic but a deep, commanding, guttural bellow that had been practiced on parade grounds for months. "Stand back from the King's Guard!" The words boomed across the square, cutting through the gasps and the sudden click of 1,000 cameras. It was the voice of the British Army, and it was terrifying. On the other side of the barrier, Mark froze. His smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure shock. He hadn't expected this. He thought the guard might just ignore the dog or maybe even crack a smile. The sheer, raw power in that voice made his blood run cold. "Brutus, come!" he yelled, and his own voice suddenly sounding thin and reedy. "Come here, boy!" But Brutus was now completely fixated on the source of the booming noise. He turned his heavy body to face the guard fully, letting out a low, guttural growl that rumbled from deep within his chest. It was a warning. To Brutus, this tall, red figure had just challenged him, loudly and aggressively, right in his face. His protective instincts, usually dormant, flared to life. He took a stiff-legged step forward, his hackles raising along his spine. The crowd gasped. Sarah clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. "Mark, get him!" she screamed. Leo and Maya clung to their mother, not understanding what was happening, only that it was scary and their father was in trouble. People were recording, but no one moved to help. Then they were transfixed by the unfolding drama. The guard, seeing the dog step forward and hearing the growl, followed the next step of his protocol. In one fluid, practiced motion, he brought his rifle across his body, swinging it down from the vertical carry position to a horizontal one across his chest. It was the port arms position, the final unmistakable warning. The muzzle of the weapon, though he knew it was not loaded, now pointed in the general direction of the dog. He stamped his foot again, even harder this time. Crack! Stand back! This was the moment of no return. The crowd was in complete silence, the air thick with tension. Brutus, now fully convinced he was protecting his family from a threat, bared his teeth. He wasn't just growling now, he was barking, deep, thunderous barks that erupted from his powerful frame. Now he took another step, then another. He was closing the distance, his body low to the ground, ready to spring. Onlookers began to scream. Children started to cry. A few people stumbled backward, pushing against the crowd behind them. Mark, his face ashen, tried to climb the barrier, but it was too high to scale quickly. He was trapped, watching his beloved pet walk into the jaws of a potential disaster. He screamed Brutus's name, his voice cracking with desperation. The guard had a split-second decision to make. The dog was now less than 3 feet away, showing clear signs of aggression. The protocol was designed for humans, for nuisance, not for an animal in full protective mode. He could not fire his weapon even if it were loaded at a civilian's dog. That would be a public relations catastrophe. But he could not let the animal get to him. A bite from a dog that size could cause serious injury, taking him out of action and creating a security breach. His mind raced through his options, and then, in a move no one expected, he made a decision that wasn't in any manual. He broke his stoic silence not with a shout, but with a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He shifted his gaze from the dog's eyes to the ground, just to the dog's left. It was a classic de-escalation technique used by animal handlers, avoiding direct eye contact, which an animal sees as a challenge. At the same time, he slowly, carefully, took one small step to his right, placing his body directly between the advancing dog and the gateway to the palace behind him. He was now guarding his post with his own body. The crowd fell into a stunned, breathless hush, waiting for the inevitable clash between the symbol of British military might and a very angry bulldog. The standoff had reached its peak. Brutus, teeth bared, was a coiled spring of muscle and fury, just a single lunge away from the silent soldier. The guard held his ground, his body now a barrier, his eyes averted. The air crackled with an almost unbearable tension. Then a new sound emerged from the chaos, a sharp, authoritative whistle, followed by a voice that carried the unmistakable calm of professional command. "Stand down. Everyone, stay exactly where you are." 2 Metropolitan Police officers, who had been monitoring the crowd from a distance, pushed their way through the horrified onlookers. One of them, a seasoned sergeant with a weathered face and calm eyes, immediately assessed the situation. He didn't yell at Mark, and he didn't try to grab the dog. He held up a hand to the crowd, signaling for silence, and then addressed his partner in a low, steady voice. "Okay, slow and easy," he murmured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a packet of mints. He unwrapped one, the crinkle of the foil impossibly loud in the sudden quiet, and held it out. "Here, boy. Good boy. Come on, then." Brutus, his growl faltering for a moment, flicked his eyes towards the new arrival. The mint, the gentle voice, the lack of aggression. It was a completely different stimulus. The red mist of his protective rage began to recede, replaced by confusion and the ever-present curiosity of a dog. He sniffed the air. Mint. The second officer, moving with a fluidity that belied his size, slowly unclipped a extendable baton from his belt, not as a weapon but as a distraction, and he held it out horizontally a few feet from Brutus's face. The dog's eyes, drawn to the movement, followed the shiny metal rod. The sergeant took a tiny step forward, still holding the mint. "That's it. Good boy. Who's a good boy?" His voice was a hypnotic, soothing murmur. "You don't want to be here, do you? Come on. Let's get you back to your family." For a long, agonizing 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then Brutus's growl subsided completely. His hackles slowly lowered. He took a tentative step toward the sergeant, his nose twitching. The spell was broken. The dog, now just a confused and tired animal in the heat, had chosen the mint over the mayhem. As soon as Brutus was a safe distance from the guard, the second officer moved with surprising speed. He darted forward and, with a practiced move, I looped a spare strap from his equipment belt around the dog's thick neck, creating a makeshift leash. Brutus, now more interested in the mint he was finally given, didn't resist. Mark, finally finding his voice, was a mess of apologies. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean he's never... Brutus, are you okay, boy?" The sergeant simply held up a hand to silence him, his face now a mask of professional sternness. The crowd, which had been frozen in terror, erupted. But it wasn't laughter. It was a cacophony of released tension, cheers for the police, gasps of relief, and a rising tide of angry muttering directed at Mark. "Stupid idiot!" someone shouted. "He should be arrested!" yelled another. The phones that had been recording the danger were now capturing Mark's utter humiliation. Through it all, and the Queen's Guard remained motionless. He had slowly, carefully resumed his original stance, his rifle back at the vertical position, his eyes once again fixed on a point in the distance. He gave no indication that anything had happened. He did not look at the dog, the police, or Mark. He was once again a statue, a symbol of unshakable resolve. But a close observer might have noticed the almost imperceptible rise and fall of his chest, the only sign that he too had just been through an ordeal. The police officers led a now docile Brutus back to the barrier. The sergeant handed the strap to a trembling Mark. "This is your dog, sir?" he asked, his voice deceptively calm. Before Mark could answer, the officer continued, his tone hardening with every word. "You are aware that you've committed several offenses? Causing a public nuisance, breaching a restricted area. I should arrest you right now." Mark's face went from ashen to white. "Please, officer, I'm so sorry. My kids were on vacation. It was a moment of madness," he stammered. The officer looked at Sarah, who had tears streaming down her face. And then, at the two frightened children clinging to her. He sighed. A long, weary sound. He looked at his partner, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. "Get out of here," the sergeant said, his voice low and firm. "Take your family and your dog and get out of my sight. And if I ever see you near a royal guard again, I will not be so lenient. Do you understand me?" Mark nodded frantically, unable to speak. He grabbed Brutus's collar and, with Sarah and the kids in tow, fled through the crowd, which parted for them like the Red Sea, a path of pointed fingers and scornful whispers. They didn't stop walking until they were blocks away, lost in the anonymous back streets of London, the shame of the day hanging over them like a dark cloud. The incident, of course, was already all over the internet. Within an hour, dozens of videos, with titles like "Idiot Tourist Sets Dog on Royal Guard" and "Bulldog versus British Army, you won't believe what happens next," were trending on social media platforms across the globe. Mark's face and Brutus's wrinkled one were famous for all the wrong reasons. The story, however, was far from over. The fallout from that single, stupid decision was only just beginning. While Mark and his humiliated family retreated to their hotel room to pack in shame, planning to cut their vacation short and fly home, and the video was making its way through a much more serious chain of command. It wasn't just a viral sensation. It was an official record of a security breach involving the King's Guard. Back at Wellington Barracks, the London home of the infantry battalions on public duties, the day's events were being reviewed. The guard who had been involved, a 22-year-old Lance Corporal named James Harding, filed his standard after-duty report. In it, he calmly and professionally detailed the incident, using the precise language of military protocol. He mentioned the approach of the civilian, the breaching of the barrier, the aggressive display of the animal, and his own adherence to the established procedures of stamping, shouting, and assuming the port arms position. He did not mention his own improvisation of avoiding eye contact, and that was a detail he kept to himself, a small piece of personal ingenuity in an otherwise textbook response. His report was a model of understatement, a stark contrast to the dramatic footage flooding the internet. His superiors, however, were not so understated in their reaction. The company sergeant major, a veteran with decades of service and a chest full of medals, watched the video on a laptop in the orderly room. He watched it twice. Then he called over the platoon commander, a young lieutenant. "Bloody hell," the lieutenant muttered, watching the Bulldog advance on the screen. "Harding kept his nerve. Good man." The sergeant major grunted. He did his job, but this— he pointed a thick finger at the screen, specifically at Mark's face as he lifted the dog over the barrier. "This is a problem. This isn't some drunk waving his arms. This is a deliberate act. It's a security test, whether this idiot knew it or not. And it went viral." The implication was clear. The Household Division, the elite unit responsible for the protection of the sovereign and the royal palaces, takes security breaches extremely seriously. While the public sees the guards as tourist attractions, their primary function is ceremonial security, which is still security. A man breaching a barrier and releasing an animal towards a sentry was a major incident. The matter was immediately referred to the Ministry of Defense Police, and, given the high-profile nature of the footage, a copy of the report was sent to the Metropolitan Police's Royalty Protection Command. Across the city at Scotland Yard, a detective constable was assigned a new, low-priority task: identify the man in the video. It wasn't a manhunt in the dramatic sense, but the wheels of bureaucracy had begun to turn. Using facial recognition software and the geotags on the countless social media posts, it took them less than 24 hours. They had Mark's full name, his Chicago address, his passport number, and his flight details. They noted with mild interest that he and his family had abruptly changed their flight and were scheduled to depart from Heathrow the following morning. A decision was made. The incident, while serious, did not warrant an arrest at the airport. It would cause a diplomatic scene and generate even more unwanted publicity. Instead, a formal letter was drafted. It was not a telling-off letter, as the tabloids would later call it. It was an official caution from the Metropolitan Police, informing Mark that his actions had been noted, that he had caused a breach of the peace and a security alert, and that his details would be kept on file. A copy of this letter was also sent to the United States Embassy in London, a routine notification when a foreign national is involved in a significant security incident. Meanwhile, Lance Corporal Harding became an unwilling celebrity within the barracks. His mates bought him pints at the NAFI and saluted him with mock solemnity, calling him the Bulldog Whisperer. He deflected the attention with a shy smile, insisting he was just doing his job. But privately, he replayed the moment over and over. He thought about what could have happened if the dog had bitten him, if he had stumbled, if he had reacted with fear instead of discipline. He thought about the tourists and their children, at their faces etched with terror. He also thought about Mark, not with anger, but with a kind of bewildered pity. How could someone be so foolish? Months passed. The video became a staple of tourists behaving badly compilation clips, viewed millions of times. For most people, it was a fleeting moment of internet entertainment. For Mark, it was a life-altering event. Back in Chicago, the local news picked up the story, branding him America's most embarrassing tourist. He lost his job as a sales manager. His employers, a conservative financial firm, did not appreciate the global notoriety. His marriage, strained by the humiliation and the non-stop online trolling, struggled. His children were teased at school. Brutus, blissfully unaware, became a minor celebrity in his own right, with neighbors pointing and whispering whenever Mark took him for a walk. One chilly autumn evening, Mark sat alone in his darkened living room, scrolling through old photos on his phone. He paused on a picture from that day in London. It was the first photo he had taken, the one of Sarah and the kids smiling in front of the Tower of London, the guard a perfect, blurry backdrop. Everyone looked so happy. He sighed, a deep, shuddering sound of regret. He had been so focused on getting the perfect shot, on capturing a moment, that he had destroyed the moment itself, and so much more. He looked at Brutus, snoring peacefully on his dog bed, his legs twitching as he chased dream rabbits. The dog had moved on. Mark realized he hadn't. The ripple effects of that a stupid act of bravado had reached across an ocean and shattered the quiet life he had taken for granted. The real story, he knew, was not about a guard and a dog. It was about how a moment of arrogance can change everything, and how some fences, once crossed, can never be uncrossed.